In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning. So yesterday when I was here getting the church ready for liturgy today, I was going about my usual tasks and I was passing by the altar, and I noticed that the vigil lamp there in the middle, the akimito, the unsleeping, was burning low. In fact, it was burning very low, but it was still lit. And I was busy. I had a couple other things on my list before I had in my mind to go and take care of that. So I just thought, oh, good, it's still there. Good, it's still lit. I'll come take care of it in a minute. And the other things I had to do didn't take very long. It couldn't have been more than 2 minutes before I came back again. But in that 2 minutes, apparently, that was all it took, because the lamp had burned out by the time I came back. It was gone. It was out. And I was thinking, as I reflected on this missed opportunity, because that lamp isn't supposed to go out. I'm not supposed to let it go out, and I did. I was thinking about how I had that opportunity and I missed it. And as we talk about compassion and mercy, almsgiving, stewardship, and Christmas today, I want us all to think about the opportunities that we miss because we pass them by or because we're just not ready yet. Today's gospel reading is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it starts with this conversation about the law. This lawyer stands up to test Jesus and ask him, "Good teacher, what do I need to do in order to have eternal life? What do I need to do in order to live?" And the answer, and Christ turns it back on him and says, "What do you read in the law? How do you understand God's teaching?" And he says, "You have to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And you have to love your neighbor as yourself." Christ says, "You have answered rightly. You're right. Good job. Do this, and you will live." And then it says that he, desiring to justify himself, asked another question. "But who is my neighbor?" And then I want to skip to the end, because we all know how the story goes. And it ends by Christ asking this young man again, who is it out of these 3 men who showed mercy to the beaten man? And he says, the one who showed him mercy. Who was it who proved neighbor to this man? And he says, the one who showed him mercy. And he says, go and do likewise. In other words, our neighbor is whoever is in need of mercy and compassion, whoever is in front of us right now. And that question of what do I need to do to live forever, love God with everything you have and everything you are for all time, and love your neighbor as yourself. And your neighbor is whoever is in front of you who needs, not who deserves, who needs compassion, mercy, and love. So if loving our neighbor means showing them mercy, and our neighbor is whoever is in need of mercy, what does it mean then to be merciful? How can we be merciful? And if you look at what the Samaritan does, there are some things that stand out. Things that are different between the Samaritan and this priest and Levite who pass by and then leave the man behind. And the first thing that is different about the Samaritan and this priest and Levite is that he is moved by compassion. There are a lot of words in the New Testament in Greek that are translated as compassion. One of them actually is eleomosini, which is the root of the word alms. And really it just means to show mercy. But the word that's used today is evsplanknos, which is a great word, if somewhat difficult to pronounce in English, evsplanknos, because what it means is not to feel anything here. It's not something you think. It's not a prickling in your fingers. It is that feeling of compassion that you have deep in your gut. Splanknos actually means gut. In your stomach, in your bowels even. It is that feeling deep within you of deep and abiding true compassion. Compassion itself is a great word because it comes from the Latin and it means to suffer with. And we put those two words, esplanknos and compatio, together, you have this understanding of a deep and abiding suffering with whoever is in suffering, with this person who is suffering in front of you. You have that same feeling, not just lightly, but deep within you. That is what it means to have compassion. This is what the Samaritan has. It's not just oh, that poor man, I should probably do something about that. He is moved by deep compassion. Compassion, though, is something that we can train away. Compassion is something that we can teach ourselves not to feel. Because much like mercy or any other good habit, we can talk ourselves out of feeling compassion. Whenever we see someone who is in need of mercy, like this man in the parable, we can look at him and say, oh, he deserved it. He brought it on himself. He shouldn't have been traveling alone, and now you see what happened. He shouldn't have been going this way at all. He should have gone a safer way. Clearly, God is judging him for some other sin. It's easy for us to talk ourselves out of compassion. And the more you talk yourself out of compassion, the harder it is to actually feel compassion. Because when we explain away our instinct to suffer with those who suffer, to have that deep and abiding compassion, when we explain it away, we are practicing numbness to the suffering of our brothers and sisters. Father John Conkle from the monastery in Rives Junction, he likes to say that we need to practice listening to our conscience, because if we haven't practiced that, we're not going to notice when our conscience pricks us. And it's going to be easy to ignore it. But if we practice listening to it when our conscience speaks to us and says, you need to do this or you really need not to do that, the more we do that, the easier it becomes to listen to that voice, to listen and notice that pinprick from our conscience. The priest and the Levite didn't have compassion, but the Samaritan did. He sees the wounded man and he is immediately filled with compassion. This is the first difference between them. The second difference is that he doesn't hesitate. His conscience pricks him, his compassion fills him, and he moves immediately to help the wounded man. And how often, I don't know about you, but how often when I see a case of need, when I see someone begging by the road, when I see someone who is hungry, when I see a need, how often do I stop and think, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to spend my time, my talent, or my treasures helping this person? Is it safe for me? Is he going to do something good with it? Or is he going to go waste it on alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be? I hesitate. And what I've noticed about this throughout my life is that whenever I hesitate, the odds skyrocket for me not to help someone. The longer I hesitate, the more likely it is that I'm not going to do anything, and I'm going to be like the priest and the Levite who just walk by and leave the man in the dust. How many opportunities do we miss because we hesitate or we put it off like the candle in the altar? How often do we say, I'll do this later, and then when we come back, if we come back, the opportunity is gone. The lamp is out, the person has left, never to come again. So that's the second difference, is that the Samaritan moves immediately. There's actually a subtle thing to that difference, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And the final difference, the last thing we see about the Samaritan, is that he had already thought about what he was going to do in this situation. The reason he was able to move without hesitation, to act without thinking or waiting, It's because he had already made up his mind long before he ever encountered this man that he was going to help him. And not only had he made up his mind that he was going to help, he had prepared himself for it. And we see this because he didn't have to go and find oil and wine to pour on the man's wounds. He didn't have to go and find or make bandages to bind up the man's wounds. He had them ready to hand. He went immediately to the man's side. He poured oil and wine on his wounds, and he bound them up, and then he put him on his donkey, and he took him away. He had everything he needed ready to hand. He was ready. He had no idea he was going to meet this man on the way to Jericho. He had no idea he was going to meet this particular person or this particular need. Kind of makes you wonder what else he had in those bags, and what else he had in those saddlebags, what other needs he might have been prepared to meet. He was ready. He had already decided that he was going to help, and he had prepared himself so that he was able to help. And how many opportunities do we miss, not because we aren't willing to help, but because we have not prepared ourselves. We have not decided in advance that we are going to assist. We have not decided in advance that we are going to meet this need with love and compassion. We have not decided in advance and prepared ourselves by setting aside our time, our talent, and our treasure, so that when God sends us a need, we are able to respond with love, mercy, and compassion. And these three things about the Samaritan, compassion, a lack of hesitation, and his preparedness, this is how we practice good stewardship. This is what stewardship means. It's not about what we give or even how much we give. It's not about whether we want to be generous. We can say, oh, I identify as generous. We can say, I am a generous person. I always want to help. I just don't have the means. But how much of the fact that we don't have the means to help is because we have not prepared ourselves. We have not managed the gifts that God has given us so that we are able to help. We have not managed our time so that we have time to help. We have not decided that we're going to help. Because it's not just about thinking generously, it's about being actually generous. And generosity is not a question of how much you give. It's not even a question of what you give. It is a way of life. You have to live your life in this way if you want to be generous. We need to have already decided to help, already prepared our gift, already practiced listening to our conscience. We need to have trained ourselves to be compassionate. Because if we aren't practicing to be generous, we are practicing to be something else. I said we're going to come back to the Levite and the priest and whether or not they hesitated. You look at them, and the gospel doesn't say that they paused and they thought about it. It says they saw the wounded man, and they immediately crossed over to the other side of the road and went on their way. They also didn't hesitate. But they did not hesitate. They weren't hesitating about showing compassion. They didn't fail to hesitate to help the man. They had already decided they weren't going to. And they went on their way. And how often are we like that? When we see someone in need, when we see someone who needs mercy and compassion, again, not a question of whether they deserve it. How often are we like that when we see a need and we've already decided we're going to cross to the other side of the road and pass by? We're not going to meet their eyes. We're not going to look at them. We're not going to talk to them. We're not going to give them any time. We're just going to go on our way. And I can guarantee you the priest and the Levite, half an hour later, probably didn't even remember the man. The same way that we don't remember the people that we pass by. In fact, we may not even see them because we have not practiced that same compassion and mercy. Or maybe we have. But this is the question that is asked us today. Which are we, the Samaritan or the priest and the Levite? Metropolitan Anthony Bloom said of these moments in the gospel when Christ calls us to be compassionate and merciful, he's not asking us to fulfill a checklist. When you have that parable of the sheep and the goats, and he talks about feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and in prison, he's not giving us a checklist of things we have to do in order to get into heaven. He's telling us how to be simply human. This is the question we're going to get at the last judgment, not, did you do all the right things? Are you a good person? It's, are you simply human? It's what we mean when we ask someone if they are humane. We have that opposite word, inhumane. This is all that it means. Do we have compassion? Do we show mercy? Do we love our neighbor? To have compassion on our fellow man simply because they are suffering and in need of compassion, in need of mercy, this is simply what it means to be a human being, made in God's image. That's what the commandments in today's gospel are about, loving God and loving our neighbor. It's not just a rule, it's what it means to be a human being. It's the deepest part of our nature, because the deepest part of our nature is that we are relational. We are made to be in relationship. We only live in relationship and in communion with God and with our neighbor. Which kind of begs the question, if we're not being human, what are we? Today we begin the Nativity Fast. It's 40 days of preparing to celebrate the feast of the birth of Christ. The feast when we celebrate the Son of God becoming human. And as big as this is, one of the things that we know about Christ is that he is showing us exactly what it means to be human. And a big part of this is the compassion and the mercy that he has. If you look at Christ and Lazarus, he weeps for the death of his friend. He knows that Lazarus is going to rise from the dead. He knows exactly what he's going to do in about 3 minutes. But he weeps out of compassion for his friend, out of compassion for the suffering of Lazarus' sisters. He weeps out of compassion for the suffering of mankind. Christ shows us what it is to be human, not just in today's parable, but in the way he lives. And it seems altogether fitting that we focus so much during this fast on the practice of almsgiving, which just means to show mercy. Because giving alms, showing mercy, and having compassion, it's not a checklist we have to do in order to get to Christmas. It's just what it means to be human. And it's so fitting we do that, especially working so hard on it this fast, as we prepare to celebrate the coming of Christ, who is the human. And so this is our challenge for the next 40 days, and, well, I should say, especially for the next 40 days and for the rest of our life, to simply be human. And the way we do that is that we decide now how we are going to respond when God sends us a need. When God sends us an opportunity to be like the Good Samaritan, decide now that we will be the Samaritan in that story and not the priest and the Levite. That when we see someone in need, we will respond immediately with compassion and mercy and love. Don't be like me with a lamp yesterday. Don't walk by and assume that the person and the need, the opportunity will still be there when you come back. Because even if you come back 2 minutes later or 30 seconds later, they might be gone. And the other thing is to prepare now. Remember His Eminence and His Jesus pocket. His Eminence always has something in his pocket. Whether it's cash or a gift card or whatever it is, he always has something. So when he sees someone in need, all he has to do is reach into his pocket and say, "Here." I'm pretty sure he doesn't even look at what it is. It might be $100, it might be $5. Whatever it is, he just reaches into his pocket and hands it. He's ready. The Samaritan was ready. Am I? Are you? And if not, it's easy enough to get ready if we do it in advance. Set aside something, whether it's big or small, whatever it may be. It might be a few $1 bills you keep always in your pocket and you replenish whenever you give them away. It might be some gas cards. It might be gift cards to Meijer. It could be anything. I know some people who will pack a small backpack with toiletries, a little bit of food, a blanket, and they'll keep it in their car so that whenever they see a homeless person, they don't have to think. They don't have to go to the store. They just reach behind them in the car, roll down the window, and say, "Here, God bless you." If you have prepared, it's so easy. And if we haven't prepared, it's almost impossible. So decide now. Prepare now. And most importantly, remember, it's not about what you give. It's not a competition to see who can give the most, because sometimes the little gift means more than $1,000. Sometimes a smile is worth more than all the food and all the money in the world. Because it's not about the gift, it's about the relationship. The same way that when we come to church, it's not about how much time we spend here, it's about the relationship that we are cultivating with the God who dwells here and everywhere. This applies to stewardship, it applies to compassion, it applies to mercy, it applies to Christmas. Everything we do in the church, everything we do in general, is about the relationship, or at least it should be. And this is a good thing to remember. It's a vital thing to remember, because sometimes we don't have anything to give. Sometimes we genuinely don't have any money to spare. Sometimes we genuinely don't have any food to spare, but what we always have is time. My father-in-law made a point throughout his life, makes a point, of whenever he saw a homeless man, he would stop and talk to him. Even if he couldn't give him anything, though I'm pretty sure he always does, he always stops and talks. He learns their name. He prays for them. He looks out for them the next time he passes by. Can't we do that? Even if we don't have anything in our pocket, can't we at least stop and say, "Hello, what is your name? May I pray for you?" And then make sure you follow through on the prayer. We all can offer our time. We can offer our time to God. We can offer our time to our neighbor. It's about the relationship. And ultimately, what it's always about is about being simply human and not missing the opportunities that God sends us to be simply human. May God bless you all. May He grant you a joyous, a blessed, and a giving Advent fast and a blessed feast of the Nativity as we look forward to it. Please stand as we continue the Divine Liturgy.